Last Saturday, commemorations took place throughout Australia and New Zealand, as well as far-off battlefields, to remember soldiers who have served and still are serving today. Commemorations were very different this year due to social distancing rules and coronavirus. Our school's families shared some of the ways that they were remembering the fallen and those in armed services by decorating their houses, writing letters, making poppies, and ANZAC biscuits. Families also participated in Light Up the Dawn.
Two brothers shared a dream as they watched a flying machine wing its way above their Tassie home. The years gave way to war and they left the Tamar shore, reached for the sky and faced a deadly foe. Mother, please don't cry, it's not our last goodbye. Being your sons means no matter what may happen, your love will guide us through the darkest night. Brothers in arms, if we should fall together, we want you to remember us with pride. We stand as one, being your sons. 20,000 feet, flack of yellow, red and green. The searchlights and the tracers pierce the black. Fires burning down below, we're putting on a show. Plot a course and pray we'll make it back. Though you're so far away, you're with us all the way. Being your sons means no matter what may happen, your love will guide us through the darkest night. Brothers in arms, if we should fall together, we want you to remember us with pride. We stand as one, being your sons. Crashed at Sturzelberg, shot down in a raid, and Kingwell died in Africa during Alamein. Being your sons means no matter what may happen, your love will guide us through the darkest night. Brothers in arms, oh, if we should fall together, we want you to remember us with pride. Being your sons means no matter what may happen, your love will guide us through the darkest night.
So where did the word ANZAC originate? Well, ANZAC, Australia, New Zealand Army Corps was an acronym devised by Major General William Birdwood's staff in Cairo in the early 1950s. It was used for registering correspondence for the new corps, and a rubber stamp was cut using the letters A and N, ZAC. After the landing at Gallipoli, General Birdwood requested that the position held by the Australian and New Zealanders on the peninsula be called ANZAC to distinguish it from the British position. Permission was also sought to name the little bay where the majority of the corps had come ashore on the 25th of April 1915, ANZAC Cove. The letters now were upper and lowercase, indicating that the original acronym had found a use beyond that of a military code, word or corps designation.
On Saturday, we remembered the anniversary of the landing of Australian and New Zealand soldiers at Gallipoli. These brave men are now known as our ANZACs. On ANZAC Day throughout Australia, New Zealand and many other parts of the world, ceremonies were conducted to honour the memory of those brave men. Whilst this year was very different to other years, the ANZAC spirit is definitely still alive. Very early in the morning on the 25th of April in 1915, while it was still dark, 36 large rowing boats loaded with Australian and New Zealand soldiers were towed by naval boats. They left the protection of the larger British ships and set off for the beaches at Gallipoli.
An hour and a half later, the first boats crunched against the rock and sand of a place now called ANZAC Cove. The soldiers scrambled ashore and started to climb up the steep slopes. As enemy machine gun fire came down on them, many were killed or wounded in those first few hours ashore. In the dark, many of the boats had drifted off course and had landed quite a long way from where they should have been. They had in fact landed where the Turkish forces were the strongest and where the machine gun and artillery fire were thickest. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, some 12,000 men had landed. Later that day, some very brave Australians reached the heights overlooking the beaches. However, they were soon forced to turn back, never to return. Within a month, over half of those who had landed at Gallipoli were either dead or wounded.
For 7 long months, the ANZACs hung on to their positions on the cliffs and slopes of ANZAC Cove. The Australians and New Zealanders could not go forward, but neither could the stubborn Turks force them back into the sea. In those months, a spirit developed amongst the soldiers, a spirit which relied on each soldier helping out his mates.
By the end of that year, 1915, some 32,000 Australians and New Zealanders had been killed or wounded at Gallipoli. The battle had been a military failure. The ANZACs had lost and they were forced to withdraw and leave Turkey. The battle was over, but in those months, when so many Australians had died under terrible conditions of heat and cold, of sickness, of suffering, of lack of sleep and food and shelter, in those months, the legend of the ANZAC was born.
In 1916, the first anniversary of the landing was observed in Australia, New Zealand and England and by the troops in Egypt. That year, on the 25th of April, it was officially named ANZAC Day by the acting Prime Minister George Pearce. By the 1920s, ANZAC Day ceremonies were held throughout Australia. All states had designated ANZAC Day as a public holiday. In the 1940s, the Second World War veterans joined parades around the country. In the ensuing decades, returned servicemen and women from the conflicts in Korea, Malaya, Indonesia, Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan, the veterans from all allied countries and peacekeepers joined in the parades.
During the 1960s and 1970s, the number of people attending the ANZAC ceremonies fell as Australians questioned the relevance of ANZAC Day. However, in the 1990s, there was a resurgence of interest in ANZAC Day, with attendances, particularly with young people, increasing across Australia, with many making the pilgrimage to the Gallipoli Peninsula to attend the dawn service. In 2020, the way we commemorate it has changed again. Not because we don't want to commemorate, but because of social distancing laws and the COVID virus, we were forced to think of different ways to show our thanks to those who have and are still serving. People spent time decorating their homes, making poppies and wreaths, and lighting up the dawn.
The ANZAC story shows us how important it was and still is to do our very best for our country, Australia, and each other, to fight for what we believe is right. The story tells us that we must always be loyal to our country and to our friends, no matter what the cost, and to do everything as well as we possibly can. The example of the men of ANZAC and later generations of Australian servicewomen and men should inspire us today. Those women and men believed in mateship, of helping out a mate or a friend. They were determined and courageous people. They were true Australians.
ANZAC Day is not about talking of war and fighting as something that is fantastic. It is a reminder that war is horrible, and while we should be proud of what our ANZACs and Australian service personnel have done, we should always remember that there are no winners in war. Every ANZAC Day we should remember all of our current and former members of the Australian Defence Force.
Poems are traditionally read during ANZAC Day services. This poem, called In Flanders Field, was published in 1915 by John McCrae and has become one of the most commonly read poems during ANZAC commemorations.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the lark still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunsets glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high, if ye break the faith with us who die. We shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
Having read John McCrae's poem In Flanders Fields, Monia Michael made a personal pledge to keep the faith. She felt compelled to make a note of this pledge and hastily scribbled down a response entitled, We Shall Keep the Faith, on the back of a used envelope. From that day, she vowed to wear a red poppy of Flanders Fields as a sign of remembrance.
You who sleep in Flanders fields, sleep, sleep to rise anew. We caught the torch you threw, and holding high we keep the faith with all who died. We cherish too the poppy red that grows on fields where valour led. It seems to signal to the skies the blood of heroes never dies, but lends a lustre to the red of the flower that blooms above the dead in Flanders fields. And now the torch and poppy red we wear in honour of the dead. Fear not that ye have died for naught, we'll teach the lesson that ye wrought in Flanders fields.
There are many significant symbols that can be seen during services on ANZAC Day. Laurel and rosemarys are worn and have been associated with remembrance. And since the Great War, the poppy has become a powerful symbol used in commemoration. Flowers in the form of wreaths and bouquets had traditionally been laid on graves and memorials in memory of the fallen soldiers.
I was a girl of 13 when my brothers went off to the war. Martin and Robert and Jack as I waved from the door. I thought, who in the world could have brothers as handsome as they? 3 Australian light horsemen, I see their proud figures today. Our parents were Irish with no love for England at all, but their sons were Australians and each bravely answered the call. In their turned-up slouch hats and their feathers and leggings and spurs, the Empire, as much as my mother knew, these sons were hers. And at the going down of the sun,
my great uncles were ordinary men. They fought in the First World War, left a wife and children when the army came to call. They were sectioned at Gallipoli, stood on the Turkish shore. All around, so many young faces, some didn't come back.
Many ceremonies of remembrance include a recitation of the Ode. It is the fourth stanza of For the Fallen, a poem written by Lawrence Binyon in 1914. The Ode has been recited in ceremony since 1919, including at the Australian War Memorial's inauguration in 1929, and at every ANZAC Day and Remembrance Day ceremony held at the memorial. Please stand quietly for the reading of the Ode.
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we shall remember them, lest we forget.
In military tradition, the last post is the bugle call that signifies the end of the day's activities. It is also sounded at military funerals to indicate that the soldier has gone to his final rest, and at commemorative services such as ANZAC Day and Remembrance Day. The last post is one of a number of bugle calls in military tradition that mark the phases of the day. While reveal signals the start of a soldier's day, the last post signals its end. We will now have 1 minute of silence. The 1 minute of silence is a time when we all present reflect upon and honour all who have fallen in war. Initially, after the First World War, 2 minutes silence has been the mark of respect, but more recently, the silence has been reduced to 1 minute. At the end of 1 minute, silence silence, you will hear another bugle call called the rouse. Since Roman times, bugles or horns had been used as signals to command soldiers on the battlefield and to regulate soldiers' days in the barracks. The rouse is a shorter bugle call that was also used to call soldiers for their duties. Being short, the rouse is the call most commonly used in the conjunction with the last post at remembrance services.
This concludes our 2020 ANZAC Assembly. Thank you to everyone who contributed to make this service special.